Hi, good morning, everyone. If you're on YouTube, then good morning. If you're watching this at a future date, that's fine too. Let's give people a few minutes. I'm here in New York City at 7 a.m. As you can see from the agenda, this is MROH, meaning Model Risk Office Hours number 10. And I've set it up so that it's good for East Asia and Australia, New Zealand, essentially for APAC in the evening. Okay, and as usual, we are live streaming on YouTube, and the minutes will be taken by Zoom's artificial intelligence companion. I'll distribute the minutes shortly after the meeting ends. All right, let's take it to 7:05 a.m. here in New York, and then I'll start. Hi, good morning, everyone. Again, this could be people watching this live on YouTube. It could be watching it the archive. I'll talk about that in a minute. And I expect other people to come in the actual Zoom. So, welcome to everyone, especially the new joiners. I'm hoping that everybody can see my screen here. Let me just stop it and start it again just to be sure. This is just the agenda for today's meeting. Share, make sure I see that there. I see the little green thing, so I think we're working. All right, so what is Model Risk Office Hours, MROH? And again, welcome to people from East Asia all the way over to Sydney and New Zealand, I think Wellington, Auckland. Okay. So with two co-authors, I'm writing a book on model risk management. And this book is, as far as we know, the first textbook ever on the subject of MRM, model risk management, also on model validation. I have a draft table of contents for this, but basically we're in the writing stage of this, and we're going to submit the manuscript in stages beginning December 1st of this year. The publisher is Academic Press, which is an imprint of Elsevier. And Academic Press has said they expect publication of the textbook of approximately spring, summer of 2026. So book publishing takes some time, almost 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years from now. So that one of the reasons that we're doing model risk office hours is to get feedback from the community on the manuscript as we're writing it, instead of once it's actually published out there 2 years from now. And another reason is just to popularize model risk management in the context of SR 11.7, the Fed document, and associated other documents. We'll focus on those documents later in this meeting. All right, so just as far as the logistics of this, the minutes of this meeting are being taken by Zoom's new tool, AI Companion. So artificial intelligence actually takes the meetings of the minutes and prepares a bulleted summary. It knows people's names, etc. It's actually, I guess, in one sense, it's very cool. It's an excellent way to do that instead of, so somebody doesn't have to spend the meeting scribbling things down. On the other hand, there is a disclaimer, and I've seen that it does get a few things wrong, just like Siri or whatever, voice system you have for your phone or your smart device. So that's the minutes. Then it's also live streamed on YouTube. If you're just joining, you didn't hear me say that 2 or 3 times, but I may say it a few times more. The live streaming is going on right now. You are being live streamed if you're on the Zoom, and you will be if you will be. And the nice thing about that is that the YouTube channel that I use for my company is automatically archiving this, the video and the audio. So if we have some time, I will go there and I will preview and give you a tour of what that YouTube channel looks like. It's through Delta Vega Incorporated, when I said my company a minute ago, and that is my own Wall Street consulting company, where I consult to the large banks and primarily. So let's talk a little bit about the textbook itself. So here I'm going to put on top of this, I don't know what that is. There we go. Okay. So one of the things that we have done, I should say that there are about 20 chapters in the book so far, and it's right around 300 pages. So we're trying to be very complete, and the textbook could be used for, a one semester course in a master's program in financial engineering. For example, in the United States, Columbia, NYU, Berkeley, Chicago, many institutions like this have UCLA have financial engineering programs. Sometimes they're called financial math, financial mathematics, computational finance, etc. But the idea is that in 1 to 2 semesters, you could have a very good understanding, we hope, of our experience, our 25, 30, whatever years of experience in model risk management, in particular since 2011, 2011 being when SR 11.7 came out. If you don't know what SR 11.7 is, then just stay tuned. I'll talk about it later in this what's looking like a lecture right now, less of a discussion. But 2011 was how the one way that the Fed responded to the great financial crisis here in the United States. For example, one of the models at the root of that, I don't think it's featured in things like the movie The Big Short, but SR 11.7 addressed what would be, let's say, the next time that everybody uses something like the Gaussian copula model to price CDOs, essentially everybody in an undiversified model way piled into the same model. And, we're all in the finance community. We know that diversification is not just about assets. It's everybody's using the same model. If they are, then that could be devastating if there's an error in the model. All right. Anyway, so model governance, this is the first chapter that we're going to send out. You can see these are my co-authors' name, Martin Goldberg and Chandrakant Maheshwari. I'm Jonathan Schachter, and Academic Press, as I said, 2026. So this is a draft version we're sending out now to some people expert in model governance. So just to show you the types of things. So model inventory is a big topic. The risk in model inventory. One interesting idea that we talk about is so-called an idea of John Hill, one of my mentors, who came up with the idea that there's something called a model ID. He has a paper called Does a Model Know Its Own Name? If you have your models under the auspices of model governance, that generally means, as I said a minute ago, that there's a model inventory. And we know that somewhere in the model inventory, there'll be a column that has the model's ID. The irony is that that model ID is not known to the model itself. And John's paper, I guess it's probably quoted one page back, asked the question, does a model know its own name? Does it know its own ID? Because if it did, then it would be like the type of system we have in the US and is probably common in most places in the world, including APAC, where an item, even if it's like a loaf of bread or a bag of rice, is something that is traced by, a barcode or a QR code or something like this, and a transponder, so that everywhere in your supermarket, in theory, where that loaf of bread is. Another application is on United States highways is the ability to pay a toll on a highway with no cash, right? So with a transponder. So the question is, can we set up a system like that now for something more mathematically abstract for a model? So can we trace it the way we could trace a loaf of bread or a fancy Asian car, a super duper Chinese EV, a super duper Toyota, and so on. All right, so that's a little bit about inventory. Let's see, where are we on our agenda? And that's a little bit about inventory in the context of model governance. I'd say, let's have it reviewed first, and I can just do not much more than the preview. Another aspect that we're talking about, I don't have a visual on this, is we have a whole chapter on kind of buy-side risk. So portfolio risk, meaning everything from, plain vanilla kind of equity portfolio management to uh, perhaps hedge funds, perhaps the kind of Two Sigma type of, you know, things such as LLMs. We have a whole separate chapter on artificial intelligence model risk. But to the extent that these things, like the way that LLMs are employed on the buy side, that's something that would go into the portfolio risk chapter. So that's something that we almost have a draft of. I'm about ready to send it out. We also talk about things in sort of more conventional things like pairs trading, such as stationarity, co-integration, things like that. And then there are just some very plain vanilla things. Martin Goldberg, you saw as one of my co-authors, is really good at this. If you start with, let's say, two stochastic processes, like two stocks and pairs, and you make a portfolio strategy based on historical correlation, especially if it's Pearson correlation, so-called linear correlation, where things have to be at least asymptotically normal or log normal. Well, what if there are higher moments? So Martin, in his section of the book, has a great diagram where he shows that even if you just add a little bit of skew, that the distributions that started off, let's say, asymptotic normal of the two assets are now, the correlation that you would measure with linear correlation or Pearson is going to be very badly distorted if you add skew. So correlation risk. So that clearly could affect this idea of portfolio risk. And there were some ways to cure that. I think most of us know that there are non-parametric correlations. In other words, sometimes these are called non-linear correlations, which I don't like. It's true that they are not assuming the kind of linearity that Pearson does, which, after all, is just based on the idea of least squares, which often is a linear regression. But really what it is it's non-parametric. In Spearman and in Kendall's tau, you don't need to assume normality or log normality or asymptotic log normality or whatever. The idea is that you can just work on something like ranking, that's Spearman, or just concordance discordance, which is basically, if you arrange things in X, if you rank them, then for a small change in X up, does that mean a small change in Y down or up, where X and Y here are the stochastic variables? So that's just a little bit on portfolio risk. So now I'm on topic 2C here on the agenda. I don't see the green thing again, so I guess I just don't trust Zoom that much. So I'm gonna stop and start the share again, and just make sure that I see that green thing. Okay, so now I see the green again. So the comparative model risk management, especially APAC, because we are speaking to APAC, or some people are listening with an APAC perspective, is something that we're doing now. I have a table I can show you briefly, but that's sort of getting ahead. But let me just say first, I'm going to start off with comparing the world in general to the major MRN countries. That is, the countries that financial regulators, have spelled out very clearly, such as the Fed and the US's Office of Comptroller of the Currency, the OCC. The Fed and the OCC are sort of interleaved. And so, sort of two agencies for the price of one, or one agency for the price of two. So why don't we go to that? Here's a spreadsheet that I put together last night. And what this is, if you look at the countries that are the focus of this call, the order here is just alphabetical. There are lots of ways to order data, but let's say that these are the countries we focus on for a minute. Um, countries, Hong Kong and five countries. Hong Kong's a special case. So Australia, China, Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore, and South Korea. So I thought it would be useful first to give some economic background for people on the call who may not actually be from APAC or familiar with those countries. Below, beginning in where it says peers, we'll talk about how this compares to some major countries and Europe itself. But for the moment, you can see what obviously China has a huge population, more than a billion, almost half a billion, 1.5 billion people. It has a comparable, very high GDP, second highest in the world behind the US. That would be here in column C. In column D, I'm talking about the per capita GDP. So just that's a brain dead calculation. I just took the GDP in billions divided by the population in millions, and the GDP there is expressed in US dollars. So therefore, I can impute a per capita GDP. The nice thing about this column here is that now we have, my background is in astrophysics. So in astrophysics, you're very happy if you can estimate something to within a factor of 10. So you can see at least now for per capita GDP, despite the fact that B and C are sort of a heterogeneous sample, that column D here with the per capita GDP is rather more homogeneous. It is less than, let's see, it is a factor of 6 or so. I can't do arithmetic this early in the morning. Anyway, it's certainly not even a factor of 10 between the per capita GDP of China at about $13,000 and the per capita of the largest two countries, Singapore and the US, which are 85 to 90,000 per capita GDP. It's useful also to focus on the markets themselves so we can look at the market capitalization. This is surprisingly, that it goes from about, well, it goes to 50,000 because you're including the US. If you didn't include the US, it would be about an order of magnitude between $457 billion for the market cap of Singapore and about $6 trillion for the market cap of China. All right, so the real purpose of this, however, was to get to these two columns here, to F and G, which describe the main financial regulators. These are, from what I can understand, the most important regulator. It's difficult to do this across all the countries. So for this column F, I'm certainly happy to take comments and or people raising their hand at this meeting and to correct me on this. Like I did notice that China has about 4 different financial regulators, it appears, so I'm not sure which the big one is. I know APRA is Australia because I've read some of their documents. I'm very familiar with HKMA for Hong Kong. The others, and the FSA for Japan, of course, but not for the others. And then finally, the last column here, column G, is does this regulator have a model risk management and hence model validation document or any sort of standard, even if they were using an international standard or something from the US or the UK, say. So the short answer is that in Asia, really, besides Japan, I was unable to find a model risk document. There are lots of documents about models, and there are lots of documents about risk, but model risk is not obviously the sum of the model documents plus the risk document. The risk documents, after all, have to do with such things as market risk and credit risk, and may have more to do with other things, data, politics, and so on and so forth. All right, so let me scroll the table a little bit down. And so we can see focus now on the peers to these countries. I'm happy to provide this table to people on the meeting. When I did the LinkedIn for this, I put you know, a PNG file, a photo up of this, um, because, well, for various LinkedIn technical reasons. But I have the Excel. If you're interested in it, I can send this. It may be a little bit easier to work with. Okay, so the four countries that I know very well that are peers of most of the economies in the world are Canada, uh, the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, UK, London, and the US, which is, well, I would say New York, for finance. So what's different about these things? These four columns that we went through, B, C, D, and E, again, you can just scroll through the spreadsheet on that. Let's focus instead on the kind of lack of information that was in the uh, first two these columns F and G, the main financial regulators and the key model risk documents, where in the case of APAC, most of these entries for column G were absent. So here are the two documents that are pretty much the same thing. I think, you would have to be microscopic to find the changes. But the OCC and the Fed that are complementary US regulators, I'm happy to explain the difference between the Fed and the OCC. But they both came out, as I said at the start, around 2011, 2012, with responses from the mathematical finance and financial engineering perspective of what went wrong with models during the great financial crisis, and how can we use this going forward to not reactively, not in the sense of, to clean up a mess, but to prevent the next mess from happening. That's model risk management, MRM. The UK, we can talk about in a little bit. This is something actually that I have a colleague, former colleague from Ernst & Young in Mumbai. So he works with clients in the UK and the US. So he has a good understanding. We worked together at Jefferies in New York. I mean, he was working remotely from Mumbai. But anyway, my colleague has some familiarity with a new document, this one here, called SS123 from the main British regulators. And this is something that, like what we're doing in the book, if I can just go to that, is we have a table where we're taking, so far we've just focused on the Fed and the PRA. And again, I don't see the green outline, so I'm hoping that this is sharing, but I'll tell you in words what it is. So in the first thing, we have the idea of, what are the things that are elements of model risk? The first one here is the purpose of a model. The second one is third-party vendor models. And so, what are the key differences between SR 11.7, the Fed document, the US document, versus the UK document, SS123. And we intend to fill in, particularly for Asia here, the FSA. If I have a minute, I will show this document. I will say that it's very thin. It's only about 12 pages and not very detailed. Seems to be from some years back. And, it may just be like a clone or a copy paste, cut and paste, however you say it in your understanding of IT. Essentially, it may be an unfiltered version of SR 11.7. So that would not necessarily be good, because we understand that there are differences in finance between countries, even between two majors like Japan, the third largest country, third largest economy, or certainly a very important economy by a lot of measures in the world. uh, and its peers. This is an old spreadsheet, so I put up something about the BaFin. I mean, I'm willing to consider Germany's financial regulator as being the largest economy in Europe. But I haven't really, again, it's sort of like what I was saying about Asia, that I'm seeing things about models and things about risk, but nothing really about model risk. I am at a disadvantage that I don't speak very much German. So it's possible that such a document would be in German somewhere in BaFin. I'm just going by what I can search for in terms of English documents. Canada, whose regulator should be here, I think it's OSFI or OSIF, Office of Supervisory of Financial Institutions, has a document, and so does UAE. And for those, let's go back to the prior spreadsheet. So, for example, there's an evolving deadline. As of 2000, it was called E25. But anyway, it's a series of deadlines for MRM. That's a situation, for instance, where there might be a local flavor. The US and Canada are similar in many ways, English being at least one of the major languages in Canada. But of course, the economies are very different, and the population of Canada at at 40 million or so, that's less than the population of California by a lot. So, and of course, in the details of the economy, they have natural resources such as oil and minerals. And so that particularly in the center and west of the country, where the mountains are, the types of mathematical models that you would see that financial companies would use might have to do mainly with commodities, whereas in the US, it would be probably more to do with stocks and fixed income investments such as treasuries and the things to hedge them, such as swaps, swaptions, caps, floors, and so on. So there may be a different perspective, even though, like I said, there are similarities in language. And as they say, Canada and US is where we have the longest unprotected border in the world, thousands of miles. But peace between the two countries, at least for now. I'm not going to get into what happens if, depending on the results of the 2024 election, except that I could see a lot of people are threatening to leave the United States and move to Canada, depending on the outcome of the election. And that's something that people did to avoid having to fight in Asia, to fight in Vietnam, for instance, and Indochina during the 1960s and 70s. They just went to Canada because Canada was a peaceful toward Asia. All right. I also wanted to mention just here at the end that the uh, the ECB guide to internal models, and that is something. So, what's the ECB? Sorry, the European Central Bank has a regulatory function across Europe, from the UK to I guess Poland. I guess in theory, regulating the Russian economy, but well, we're also not going to go there. There's some fairly interesting mathematical finance in the shape of in the heteroscedasticity that happened to Euribor when Russia began its war with Ukraine. It basically, introduced an enormous amount of heteroscedasticity, not just volatility, but really produced a non-stationary interest rate, which is very difficult to work with. And it breaks things like back testing of VAR models because of not because there's any problem with the model, but because there's a problem with the data itself, the Euribor itself. It would be as though the 3 month, I guess technically the 91-day United States Treasury bill, the T-bill, the so-called 3 month T-bill, if that broke and became very heteroscedastic, that would be not a very good thing. All right, so let me I'll keep this active, but I'm going to minimize it. And so I think what I want to do is here in New York, it's 7:35 a.m. So we've done about 30 minutes of the meeting. Let me talk for a few more minutes, and then if there's discussion, we can talk about that. I can also supplement it with a bit more of as we say in the United States, some show and tell, some preview of the other parts of the book, and about just sort of my philosophy, our philosophy. Um, right. And, and in the context of that, we could also talk about, for instance, we clearly are writing the book in English. So it would be useful to know, if you're in other countries, for instance, in Hong Kong, would people read such a book like this in English? I think the answer is probably. I'm not so sure about other centers such as Tokyo, um, and so and Seoul. So then the question is, should we be thinking longer term in terms of translation? Should it be translated into Japanese, into Mandarin, into Korean, and so on and so forth? We are considering that from the European perspective as well. I think German, would probably be the first topic or language that we would translate it to in Europe. French, certainly a big consideration as well, the two largest economies in Europe. Right. So let me just go to Japan. If you give me a minute. I said a minute ago that I thought it was kind of a thin document. I have it here, but I've got this Windows thing. There we go. All right. So here's the Japanese model risk document, Principles for Model Risk, published, as you can see, by the FSA, the Financial Services Agency of Japan, in 2021. So that's essentially, I don't know about prior versions of this. It doesn't say versions. And, and again, we all understand we're all from different parts of the world. So this is a translation, I guess, from Japanese. So, there's always going to be some translation asymmetry or some possible confusion when we are trying to do everything in English. So, maybe somebody else on this call or looking at the archive can give some information if someone reads kanji or if they read ordinary Japanese, if they can opine on this. Right. So a couple of things at the beginning. It's only 13 pages long. If I put up SR 11.7 itself as a comparison, and you can easily Google that, sometimes you just get yeah, this is sort of the overall summary. Here's the Fed's document from their website. It's SR 11.7. I think SR means supervisory something. I don't know. Anyway, so it's 21 plus pages long and has quite a large scope. I think if you put this side by side, I guess I can do that, right? With the Japan one, you can see that while the topics are familiar and perhaps equivalent, so this is the type of thing that we discuss in the book, being able to do something like this. So that could be useful for a bank, for instance, that has a Tokyo office and a New York office and wants to make sure that both the Fed and the OCC, who is named up here, the two main banking regulators in the United States, are good with whatever FSA is, or so it's a different order, but certainly there are a few things here. But like one of the things you can do with this, we actually have a whole appendix in the book about SR 11.7 itself. So let's say I always find it a little difficult with this to figure out which side of this I'm on. So look for the word challenge. All right. So here is the word challenge. There are 9 instances of it. The first one has effective in it. The rest do not. So the Fed's idea of effective challenge is a pretty important one. This is not a basic lecture discussion on model risk, but in the Fed's context, effective challenge is defined right here. And I think it's worth it that it's spotlighted by the Fed. Why don't I scroll this down so it's near the center of the screen? That is, it is critical analysis by objective informed parties who can identify model limitations and assumptions and produce appropriate changes. And sort of why is this necessary to begin with? There's actually an analogy with the Defense Department, like the US's model development during the Cold War had a very similar situation to what is going on in finance. So, why do you need this independent area? It's basically because the models do not have the ordinary process. Some of us on the call here have probably been in academia. I was. When I wanted to publish a paper in astrophysics when I was a scientist at Harvard, I would have to send that out and it would be eventually published, but only after people in the community had vetted that model. And in fact, part of the scientific method, of course, is that a result that you produce in your model can be, I guess you can call it challenge. That's not the vocabulary in astrophysics or in physics in general, but it can be repeated, repeatability, that it's not something that a result that you got something that looks like a laser because, a piece of glass was bent or there was a chemical contaminant, that this is real physics that we're observing and not something systematic. So unfortunately, you don't have that on Wall Street, and you don't have that in defense. To start with the Cold War, I guess it's obvious, but from something like the environment of the movie on Oppenheimer and the Los Alamos project, it's pretty clear that the models that were being developed there could not be sent out to the community. This is not something that we wanted our enemies in World War II to know that we were doing, the Trinity test results, for instance. Now, in the case of banks, it's not about waging war, it's about waging economics, waging finance. So in this case, instead of worrying about the results being something that could lose lives and potentially lose the war, now we're worried about losing market share or a competitor who would steal our idea, what's called in the US often the secret sauce. What is our special secret sauce? So in either case, you cannot have an external type of this academic peer review process. Thus, at the Defense Department and at places like Los Alamos during the Cold War, they developed the idea of VNV, validation and verification, that an internal group would review the models so this is getting to the idea of why you need effective challenge. So if you have an external group, that external group is by definition, you know, going to be independent. When I was an astrophysicist, I collaborated with a colleague at Nagoya University in Japan. Nagoya has its competitors. Academia in Japan is like it is in the United States, that everyone wants to get the best result. Everybody wants to win the Nobel Prize in physics and so on. And so Tokyo is competing with Nagoya, is competing with Kobe. The different parts of the country and the different universities are competing, and that ensures the scientific method. Well, if it's internal, and particularly if the CEO is writing everybody's checks, this is my cat, sorry, one of my cats, then to what extent is that group truly independent? That validation and verification group. Do you isolate them physically? Not to use the word on an Asian call, but like the so-called Chinese walls that we talk about on Wall Street, separating the private and the public sides of a bank. I mean, you can put the walls in there, but to what extent are those people truly independent? And that was something that was thought about, as I said, in the U.S. Defense Department, and is thought about by not only the banks, but by the bank's regulator here in the U.S. So, effective challenge is essentially, let's see, the word independence is not used in this paragraph, but the idea is that like you got to pay the independent validators in your other group at the bank a pretty good salary. If you pay them nothing, like the mushroom theory of management and IT is to keep your programmers in the dark and feed them garbage, like you're raising mushrooms. So no, you can't do that. If you don't elevate that group and register its importance, then it's the second line of defense, but it can't defend you from anything. So competence, influence, right? Because we have some situations that we talk about in the book where somebody says this model is risky, you should have limited trading authority on this, so you can trade, HK dollars, but you can't trade yen, or you can't trade Aussie dollars because of some issues in the mathematical understanding of those countries, because of legal restrictions, etc. So you put a trade level restriction in there, limited trading authority, and yet, how do you really track that actually happened? That goes back to what I talked about before, that if a model actually had its ID, if it knew its name, then periodically there would be an audit trail that you could say, hey, wait a minute, this model is not supposed to be used for Aussie dollars. Let's say, I forget what I said a minute ago, but let's say Aussie dollars cannot be used, but it can be used for HK dollars and yen, and then suddenly you see that 100 times it's been used in the last 3 months for Aussie dollars. So, that's not effective influence, that it did not get to the board. It did not get to the CRO, the importance of this, or there was some override, a manual override that decided that somehow all the good work that the model validators did is somehow ignored. Some of that could be humorous. Some of it could lose a lot of money. A company that I worked for had a Tokyo office that wanted to sell correlation. They specifically wanted to sell asset correlation. And as I said before, there are many ways that can go off. So just consider, like, take a subdivision of Nikkei stocks and just make a basket of 10 of them. So you have historical correlation. Then you have derivative that pays, I don't know, on the average, or on the worst stock, or the worst 2 or 3 stocks averaged, or whatever. But you have something where it's clear that it's not just the variances and the means that are involved, but it's the covariances, right? So the whole variance covariance matrix is really what's underlying the pricing. So what happened to this bank is they kind of knew that when they got a price for a customer, but they did not think about hedging. And since the correlations were not stable, neither were the hedges. So at the time, so eventually, so there was a lot of model risk. And I have to assume that some model validators pointed out that correlation in now is not historical correlation, in the same sense that you cannot use the historical risk measure to talk about the physical risk measure. The historical and the physical are the same. You can't price things with derivatives by using the historical measure in general. You need to use a risk neutral measure. So this is almost like that. It was like, how can you have the risk neutral measure being used to price a basket, and yet you're essentially hedging it by looking at historical correlation, right? So that should have been something that should have been flagged to begin with. All right, we do have about 10 minutes left here, and I'm slowing down. But effective challenge. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's great that a country will do something like this, but to talk about the 3 lines of defense, this is what Japan says in a document. this is not something that's covered in SR 11.7. So I guess I would critique this and say, of course, this is something we mentioned in the first page of that model risk document. I think the first few lines, that there are 3 lines of defenses. But if this is something that you need to explain to people doing model risk, I think I'm a little concerned. I raised my hand. Excuse me, if you have to explain that there's model risk at 3 different levels, then, this maybe is something that should be understood as far as general risk management, and not necessarily in a document about model risk. All right, so let's put that to bed. I guess I've done mainly my own discussion here, and I take it that people are having a nice dinner in APEC, and perhaps we'll look at this on another day. But I'll just say that my door is open. I'll put up right now a couple of ways that you can contact me to memorialize that for the phone call. So my current position is I'm at Delta Vega, but I've worked for a number of banks. The last one I worked for was at Jefferies. I'm also interested in running a financial mathematics program. There's an opening at Columbia right now because of a sudden death of the head of that mathematics and finance program. So I'm competing for that position. So I may do that going forward, or I may try to work for a bank. I've certainly worked for banks around the world. I sold CDO software to Mizuho, to their New York office here in New York in the few years before the financial crisis. So I guess you could say I sold them the Gaussian copula to Mizuho, and so on. And I've certainly worked with Hong Kong banks and so on, Hong Kong offices. So my email for corporate is JS1, my initials, at delta-vega.com. Just to say the website is www.delta-vega.com. So this is my consulting company. I'm not going to say it's in the best shape, but we want to start putting up the minutes because I think it's easier to browse those, and we may eventually put up some of the YouTube videos. I'll grab from my email, my LinkedIn. My last name is, it's easy to spell in some countries. It's easy to spell in Germany. It's easy to spell in Israel, but Americans really can't spell it. So I'll tell you I'm Jonathan Schachter, PhD, but I'm just looking for the LinkedIn app here on my other screen. So if you look at me, that's like this. Note the PhD, Jonathan Schachter, PhD. And then if you go into this, you'll see, let's see, my information. My highest degree is from UC Berkeley. If you like, I see the Bay Area as a real gateway to Asia, the Golden Gate Bridge being the kind of if the Statue of Liberty is welcoming Europeans and people from the Americas, so the Golden Gate Bridge and the city of San Francisco, I think, are welcoming people from Asia. And so, yeah, so for this one, you can see right here, I have my profile. I'm just going to cut and paste this. All right. Oops. All right. And then I can give you back a little bit of the time here. I'm open to suggestions for future talks, future instances of this model risk. Office hours will occur on Tuesdays, as it has been this is number 10 for the prior 9. Next week, if the default thing would be to go back to 8 o'clock New York, and that got some people from Europe. People are busy, and I found it's hard to get people on a call, particularly for an hour. But I'm hoping that people will see this in the archive. I thought that 8 a.m. New York would get, people in London and Paris and Frankfurt in the middle of the day. Also, some parts of Africa, such as Lagos and Johannesburg. But in practice, people are in the middle of the day. So then you put it in the evening, and then people are doing what people are doing probably right now. So they can't be on the Zoom. And they're having, some fabulous Asian meal, bulgogi, sushi. Uh, you know, I love the Asian eggplant. I also farm a little bit, I should say, since we're wrapping up. I farm those purple Asian eggplant, and they're just delicious. They grow a lot better. I grow them in Long Island, which is, only within 200 kilometers of New York City. But I get, something that obviously clearly was cultivated in places such as Japan and China. Just fabulous, fabulous, with a little garlic and some fresh herbs from the garden, like barbecued eggplant in the summer is just fantastic. It's that purple eggplant, that Asian eggplant, I find is the easiest to grow, the easiest to cook, and just that beautiful purple color. So I can't say good enough things about Asian eggplant. Right. So I think I've run out of things to say. Next steps are AI will generate the meeting minutes. I'll put that up on LinkedIn. And already the YouTube is recording this. When I stop, it'll save the file to the completed version on the Delta Vega channel. Oh, if I have a minute, I will put up the Delta Vega. So the archive is right here. I guess if you're listening, this is not that useful to you if you're watching this on the archive. But the that I think is in, let's see, I can Google it. Delta, there it is. So this is it's the archive, and it's also the live stream is on this. So that's where this is playing right now. As I said, you're probably doing that. And I guess the last slide I'll put up is this, which is just what the website looks like. You can see this is me in a different colored shirt. And that particular one, 716, had Martin Goldberg, one of my collaborators. We've had a number of different areas like the Middle East and South Asia. And this is the live version that's being recorded right now. They vary in length. There's been a request for a table of contents for each one to appear as a different slide, especially a clickable table of contents. That's something that I'm considering. I had a couple of people ask about it, but sort of not enough at the moment. And you can subscribe to the channel too. You can see that I have a number of subscribers, that there are 9 videos up here on this Delta Vega site. This will be number 10. So you're free to subscribe. Of course, Delta and Vega, if you're not familiar, have to do with 2 first-order derivatives that are used to manage calls, puts, and other simple, I guess I'll use the word again, simple derivatives. So Delta and Vega are derivatives of the prices of derivatives, of calls, puts, swaptions, and so on. This sort of boilerplate optionality. Delta being the partial with respect to the underlying, such as the stock price, and Vega being the partial with respect to volatility. Great. So we're just coming up to 8 o'clock in New York. I thank everybody for being on this call, whether you're listening to it in real time or not. And I'll have notices up on LinkedIn. I'm going to stop the share, and please get to me there. I invite you to follow me on LinkedIn for this and for some of the other topics, some of which I'm testing out, some of which I suddenly get interested in, and some of which I'm testing out as possible ideas for the book, and some discussion of our co-authors. So have a great evening. If you're in Asia, have a great afternoon, evening. If you're in the parts of the world between New York and Sydney, going east. And I hope to see you again. Thanks.